Hi, and this morning I'm really happy to be joined by Ruth Chipperfield. Hi Ruth, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm good, thank you.
Excellent, very lovely necklace and earrings you're wearing there. I know we're going to talk more about that. So you might be thinking, why on earth am I commenting on Ruth's jewellery that she's wearing? Well, Ruth is a jewellery designer and goldsmith. She founded Ruth Mary Jewellery and specialises in remodelling sentimental heirlooms into bespoke pieces of jewellery that tell a story. She comes from a chemistry background, which is pretty fascinating, and I'm hoping we're going to talk a little bit more about that. She's entirely self-taught, fusing her passion for science with gemstones and creative design. And I should explain why Ruth is here, because this may seem a random conversation to be having on a divorce podcast. But me and Ruth got to know each other through a Facebook group that we're both members of. And she approached me, and her question was, what do your clients do with their wedding rings and engagement rings? And I was like, don't know. So we thought we would have this conversation because Ruth has some brilliant ideas. So before we get really stuck in, so tell me a bit more about how you got into this, because I'm fascinated by the science link.
Well, it started out as a more of a personal story. So I started out in chemistry. I was doing my degree, and then I got quite poorly with a condition called narcolepsy. So then that's the point where I sort of had to drop out. I'm extremely blessed to be very happily married, which I know obviously isn't the case for everyone. And my husband was sort of my carer during that time. And there wasn't much that I could do other than sort of do things with my hands a little bit, a few waking hours I had in the day where I was healthy enough. So I'd sort of been making jewelry, and then gradually the design sort of got more interesting and people started to buy things. And I see jewelry very much as sculpture. So I've always thought in 3 dimensions, which is I think why chemistry always suited me, because you're thinking of molecules in a 3 dimensional space. So obviously that's on the very small scale, but then on the bigger scale, or well, still small, you get jewelry where initially my designs, I'd hand stitch lace and then cast that in precious metal. So that's including the necklace and earrings I'm wearing. And yeah, so it kind of sort of grew from there. I mean, I did go back to university and I did some research on environmental sustainability and things. But yeah, I think the two go really, really nicely together, actually, especially when it comes to gemstones and their durability and their properties and things like that. So that's kind of more how it came about. But I'm sort of coming a bit full circle now and having conversations with my old professors in terms of developing undergraduate experiments to do with materials from metals and gemstones and things like that, which is quite exciting, really.
Oh, wow, I love that. That's amazing. So how long have you had your business then?
It's been about, I think, 5.5 years that I've been doing this. Yeah.
So a fair time. And in the introduction, we talked about your business is about remodeling sentimental heirlooms. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah. So I just love stories, and I think that's what jewelry is all about. It's the story, and so often people have a piece of jewelry in their jewelry box that they don't wear. It carries sentimental value, but it's not their style. So what do you do with it? It sort of sits there. And that's where I'll come in and I'll redesign, I'll reuse the gold, I'll reuse the gemstones to design something completely new. I mean, one I did recently, then it was the client's mother's it was her engagement ring, and it had diamonds and sapphires sort of in a row, so it was a bit more like an eternity ring. And I remodeled that piece and sort of designed a kind of Art Nouveau style cross, which I'm sure you'll probably see on your screen. I'll send you the image afterwards. yeah, it was an Art Nouveau cross, and the idea behind that was this client's mum really liked cross shapes, quite religious, and hearts as well. And we didn't want it to be really gimmicky, but the client, she didn't really know what she wanted, so she kind of just gave me creative freedom. We chatted about different shapes, and then I came up with a design, and it was just perfect for her. So that's quite common. Sometimes clients will know exactly what they want, and other times they don't really. They're just open to ideas. And then I'll just sort of pick up different clues in terms of how they want to wear it, what's their lifestyle, and things like that. So, or another one that I did this was actually a client from a previous marriage, and she had the engagement ring that she wasn't wearing. It sat in a box, kind of what do I do with it? And some people, I mean, we'll get onto that in a minute, but remodeling jewelry sort of from marriage jewelry isn't for everyone, but for her then I reused the gold and the diamond and designed a necklace for her daughter, who was only about 7 at the time, so it was for her when she turned 16. So it was a matter of designing something that kind of suits her character. She wasn't a sort of goody twee little girl wearing dresses, so flowers and those kind of motifs were completely out of the question. She was more of a sort of feisty girl like her mother. But it was
great.
Yeah, absolutely. So she knew her mind, and it was a matter of just designing something where it would hit, it's timeless, but it would hit style trends when she turned 16, because sort of trends tend to follow roughly a 20-year cycle. So you can predict, especially with jewelry, you can predict what's going to be on trend. And when you're 16, that stuff's important.
Wow, that's really clever. I'd never even thought about that side of things. And I hadn't got a clue that fashion trends went in 20-year cycles. That's amazing.
More or less. I mean, it's not quite as simple as that, but they do kind of follow a bit of a pattern.
Gives you a guide. Yeah, no, yeah. I love that. That's really cool. So when you messaged me on Facebook, there were things in your head about what people could do with their rings. So I know with my wedding ring and my engagement ring, they're I think they're in a box somewhere, but my original plan was to give them to my daughter, who is coincidentally 16. But like, since speaking to you, I'm thinking, well, maybe I'll get you to have a look at them and see if we can do something for her.
Yeah, send me a picture. That's what I would say to people as an issue. Just send me a picture, and then I'll give you my thoughts, because often it's that first step where you're like, I don't really know where to start. And jewelry is such a big topic as well. Sometimes sort of like most jewelers, you'll go into a jeweler and say, I want to buy something, but I don't know what I want. And because it's such a male-dominated industry, then you can be met with quite a lot of resistance, whereas I come from the other aspect. Like, sort of my core values are about sort of being a compassionate human and a creative. So I'm like, let's just have a creative conversation, even if it doesn't lead anywhere. Like, I'm gonna have a good time chatting to you. So yeah, but I find with wedding and engagement rings, there are kind of 3 things that people might tend to want to do with them, and they're not always straight after a divorce. I mean, obviously, as you'll know, divorce is a longer process anyway, but sometimes people do actually just want to leave them in the box until they feel mentally ready to even think about it, which is absolutely fine. I've said to people before when we've been chatting, actually, let's wait a few months, because I want it to be a healing process, not something that people get stressed about. But the 3 things I tend to find is, one is people just want to get rid, just sell them. And I can go into that in a bit more detail in a minute. But so one is sort of get rid, sell them, just get some money and then not have to think about them anymore. The other is resize, either for themselves, say to wear an engagement ring on a different finger, or for, say, a daughter or a sister or a cousin or whoever it might be. And then the other one is a complete redesign.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I can go into sort of the first one.
Yeah, let's go through those.
Yeah.
So selling.
Yes.
Talk me through that.
So selling jewelry, what often surprises people is whatever you paid for your rings, you'll get nothing like that back if you sell them, unfortunately. And when it comes, especially when it comes to wedding rings and the sort of simpler engagement ring, by simple I mean ones that you see around a fair bit, because as I mentioned, it's a bit of a male-dominated industry, and sort of you get a lot of very, very similar engagement rings, that when you're in the trade, it's sort of similar to a lot of others you've seen. So unfortunately, they don't sort of fetch large amounts of money in terms of design in their own right.
Why? I don't. That's really surprising. So
Yeah.
why do they not fetch on the kind of second-hand
Yeah,
market?
so
I feel like that sounds horrible, but why?
yeah, I mean, it's a variety of reasons. One is the retail markup.
Okay.
So if you're selling to, I mean, if you were, say, to sell privately, then you might get a bit more for it. But then obviously there's the trust issue, especially with fine jewellery. So that can be quite a tricky one. But yeah, I mean, there's the retail markup. Then there's, generally speaking, and again, we're talking about sort of the simpler, more modern designs. I can talk separately about sort of, say, the antique and sort of style rings that might be sold as they are. Then you're kind of looking at the individual components. So you've got gold, where you'll get sort of the scrap value, which sounds awful, but that's what it is. Yeah, it is. And that needs refining and things like that. So
sure.
Sort of it's not as simple as just sort of you can just melt down and reuse, because you've got different methods of, say, casting jewelry uses a slightly different sort of makeup than if you're drawing wire and hammering it. There are just a few different additives that will aid the process, so it sort of depends what it's used for. So generally that would be scrap value. I mean, personally, what I tend to do is, if a customer has some jewelry they want to get rid of scrap, as someone in the trade, I get a higher scrap price than sort of your average person, and I'll not make money on the scrap. I'll then sell that to my dealer, whatever you want to call them, and then I'll essentially give the same amount in vouchers. So if that's something they want, then, I mean, if they don't want anything new, they just want to sell, then obviously there's no use to them. But yeah, sometimes it can be helpful, especially if people just don't want to think about something, just want something new, and just like, here you go, you sort it. So that's in terms of the metal. In terms of the diamonds, then, and other gemstones as well, then again, you've got obviously the retail markup. But the other thing is, generally, the paper trail ends up being lost, and that's something quite important when it comes to ethical things and that. So diamonds, actually, especially the tiny diamonds, you basically get nothing for them, pretty much. I mean, sort of a nice solitaire diamond in an engagement ring, you'll get something for. And if someone wants to just get rid of an engagement ring and it's got a decent diamond in, what I'd personally advise is, there's an auction house called Fellows Jewellery, and they're brilliant. You can send stuff to them, they'll check it, they'll value it, and then you're not paying separate for valuation and then selling it. So it's all kind of in one. Obviously there are fees involved, but that's probably your best bet to do that. So yeah, but with diamonds, then they all have to be certified. So if for it to be resold, I mean, if you're buying a diamond which is, I don't know, 1 carat or something, you want to know what kind of diamond you've got there for your insurance purposes. So it's those kind of things. And then with other gemstones, sometimes they need repolishing, because they do, well, I mean, it's an easier case with diamonds, sapphires, rubies, even things like aquamarine, topaz, anything. If you Google the Morse scale, MOHS, 7 and above, or mainly 8 and above, then you're in a better position. Anything below that, then it's much, much harder to recycle. You've then got to know what treatments the stone has had, which obviously you can't. So there are so many things that you sort of have to get through, which you wouldn't necessarily think of when it comes to recycling gems, which all then takes time in the industry. And then people who are selling at a lower price for it. Which is why often a really lovely way is actually, well, if I'm not going to get that much for it anyway, I may as well reuse it.
Definitely. Wow, that's a complete minefield that I never
No, you wouldn't, would you? Yeah.
No. Okay. So second option.
So after making it sound incredibly complicated, then hopefully I can boil that down. That if you want to get rid of jewellery and not have to think about it, take it to a pawnbroker's or a local bullion dealer. If you really just don't want to think about any methods or anything, take it to me. I won't make money off it, but then you can buy something from me for the equivalent amount of money. If you don't know where to start, I'll just advise, that's totally fine. Or you can send it to fellows, especially if it's got a gemstone in of note, then yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, so option 2.
The resize.
Yes.
Yes. So resizing, it can be, I mean, some rings are more difficult than others to resize. If there are certain settings where if you end up making it smaller, the gemstones kind of pop out. So that would sort of not particularly work. I mean, in my experience, most of the time you're making gemstones bigger, not small. Gemstones, that would be a challenge. You're making rings bigger, not smaller. I'm not sure why that is. Maybe it's because people then have it on a.
That's my thin, other than my little finger. That's
exactly. I think that's what it is.
Finger. So if I'm going to wear it on this one or this one.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the thing. And then also, especially with women, finger sizes tend to increase with age, and that's just due to, obviously, pregnancy is a common one. You kind of, your fingers don't always go back down to the size that they were if you gain weight. That's just the way it is. That it doesn't seem to correlate with the best of the bodies, to tell you. Sometimes it just sort of, people kind of have a hang up about their finger size, and I'm like, what? Yeah, it just gets such a range. So yeah, and then sort of hormonal changes, sort of arthritis and things. So those are reasons why often they end up being really sort of sized up rather than down. And so depending on how much metal is in there, then you can just stretch it. So that's not as expensive. Sometimes you need to cut and then just insert a bit of metal. What I tend to do is I get my laser queen, as I like to call her, to laser weld, which just means that the gemstones are extra protected. So you're not kind of heating in the same way. I always, whenever I do any kind of repair or resize, I have to give people disclaimers of things that might happen to their jewelry that I can't be responsible for, which always sounds horrible because it sounds like you're kind of nitpicking their jewelry for its quality and all of that. So I try and kind of communicate why. But yeah, I kind of have to do that. Otherwise, yeah, if something did happen, then yeah, or I'd just have to charge a ridiculous amount, which no one wants. So yeah.
Okay, so that makes sense. That version, that sounds relatively straightforward.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's not straightforward from your end, but
well, no one needs to bother about that. That's my problem.
From my end, that sounds a little bit more straightforward. And then the third option is the one that absolutely, like, totally fascinates me, which is the suggestion of making the rings into something else.
Yeah.
So run us through how that works.
So there's one that, I mean, I can sort of hold it up to the screen, but this one,
listening to the podcast, this is not going to mean anything to you, so I can, maybe you want to have a look on there.
Oh yeah, that's true.
On the video, but on YouTube. But it's a ring that's been kind of transformed into almost a sort of V shape. I don't want to.
Yeah, so it kind of almost represents wings.
I might let you describe it because you're probably better.
That's true. Yeah, I'll stop holding it up because for the benefit of those people on the podcast. So basically, I can't remember how big the diamond was. I mean, it's irrelevant, really, sort of, in a sense, to a lot of people. I mean, sort of can be a bit, sort of mine's bigger than yours type thing sometimes, can't it? Let's not play that game. But yeah, so absolutely lovely diamond. And I mean, so with this one, then I kind of went around sort of lace style and that, and did a necklace where it's almost like wings, sort of fly, freedom, kind of be a high flyer, achieve what you want. So that's kind of, I like to sort of have metaphors and meanings that aren't just really obvious and gimmicky, but it just sort of means something in terms of new life. And obviously it's for the daughter, so it's different anyway. But the client did actually say she might wear it herself. I don't know whether she has or not. I haven't seen her in a while. But yeah, so I basically hand stitched this shape in cotton thread, and then cast that in the 18 karat gold, and the setting that I used, I did a wax setting just for the model that was then cast, and then set the diamond in the
Hang
middle.
on a sec, slow down.
So I'm probably giving too many details in terms of the technical
You're
side.
talking in a whole new language to me.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
What's a wax setting? Tell me, talk me through, like, so you stitch some cotton.
Yeah, so what I do is I create a model. So it's basically the shape that the final piece is going to be, but I create it in a different material and then make a mold around it, chuck the model away, and then pour in molten metal. There are a few more processes, but you don't need to know about all of them.
No, that's very clever.
Yeah, so I did the general lace shape, and then to create the setting where the diamond was going to sit, then that was designed on CAD and then done sort of 3D printed in wax, as it were. Again, I'm probably going to way too much detail here. And that's then that I then attached to the lace model. So the original model was basically part wax, part sort of cotton thread lace, and then made a mold around it, chucked the original thing away, and then poured in the 18 karat gold. And in terms of whether people have 9 or 18 karat, I mean, you don't always have to sort of recycle the actual gold from that specific piece of jewelry. You can sometimes use other gold. It depends what's important to people and things like that. But with this particular diamond, because it was quite a decent sized diamond, then I said actually it would be very odd to set it in 9 karat. And if you ever to show that to people in the future, they'd be a bit like, oh, is this diamond real? Is it sort of, I mean, obviously you can discover quite quickly whether it is or isn't, but yeah, generally, I mean, there is a slight color difference with 9 versus 18 karat, and with this size diamond it just seemed to make sense. When it comes to other pieces of jewelry, then I'm very honest, I'm just like, you're wasting your money on 18 karat. Like 9 just seems completely appropriate. So yeah, so that's what I did, and yeah, it turned out a really, really lovely piece.
It does, it looks absolutely beautiful. When you've got, so I've got I'll try and word this another way. I've got an engagement ring, which is 9 karat gold with a tiny diamond in it. And I've got a very plain, but 18 karat gold wedding band.
Okay.
So are you thinking, like, if I said, oh, well, I would like this remodeling, would you use like, I'm not sure how this works, but would you sort of aim to use the gold from both rings and do something, like if I wanted it making into a necklace, for example, for my little girl? I'm still calling her my little girl, even though she's 16, nearly as tall as me. But like, if we were going to do something like that, would you use the metal from both rings? Would you just use the diamond? What's the process?
Well, first of all, I think what we do is we chat about what kind of necklace you want. I always start with, what do you want? What's the general start? And then we work out the how. So that's always sort of the starting point, and then a bit sort of around budget. Sometimes people have no idea what things are going to cost, and then I'll guide them a little bit. Sometimes it's generally quite helpful to know roughly. But then it would be sort of, it's a little bit more expensive to use the specific gold from the rings, because there's an extra refining cost, unless I'm literally cutting the metal, shaping it. But if it does need melting down and things like that, then often it does need a little bit of refining, so that adds a bit of cost. So it depends what's important to people. If they're not that bothered, then I'll sell that for sort of scrap, there's that horrible word again, and buy new gold. Okay. So, but in terms of, like, let's say, for example, you wanted that specific gold, and generally with hallmarking, you kind of want it to either be 9 or 18 or 14 karat, can work as well, as used less over here, but there's no reason why not. So what I'd do is I'd melt those down, re-alloy it, which basically means you're removing all the other metals so that there's just gold, and then adding other metals back in so that it's the 9 or the 18 or whatever carat you want. So you can do different. I mean, what you can even do, and this is something that a lot of people don't know, is if you've got yellow gold and actually you've decided you don't like yellow gold, you want white gold, that can be made into white gold.
No way, can it?
Yeah. Wow. So it's the same process. So you melt it all down, take out all the other metals. So with yellow gold, you've sort of got a fair amount of copper in and silver. Take all of that out, and then you're adding palladium and other metals in to make it white gold, and then you use that.
That's really funny, isn't it? Because I always noticed a massive difference in the, like you said before, the colour of 9-carat gold is quite different to the colour of 18-carat gold. So my engagement ring was 9, my wedding ring was 18. And I was never that keen on the colour of my wedding ring. It's a bit more orangey.
It is, yeah.
And I was like, oh, I'm not sure I I preferred randomly, preferred the colour of the 9-carat. So like if I was looking to make something out of them, I would say, well, actually the colour of the 9 is not, I prefer it to.
Yeah.
I've obviously got very cheap tastes.
It's not about that, it's just about preference. And I think that's the thing. I mean, sort of you get, I mean, every jeweler has kind of got their opinion on things. My personal opinion is I absolutely just love design. I'm not so keen on non-precious metals for a variety of reasons, and you can't do as much with them and that kind of thing. But in terms of precious metals, then sort of whether it's 9 or whether it's 18, and sort of, you know, you can have a big kind of argument of what's better than sort of investment and blah, blah, blah. But ultimately, it's what you prefer and what you want to wear and what's your story.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I totally appreciate that. I know we don't talk about money in this country, but we're gonna, if it's okay. So what are we, I know it's going to depend on the design, etc. What kind of, what are we, I'm assuming there's like the top limit's sort of limitless, but what are we starting point?
So it'd probably be, your starting point might be sort of around, say, 800 or something like that. Sort of, I'd say this is a vast range of a starting point of sort of 800 to 2000. It's one of those where it's flexible. It depends how much gold you've got, whether you need a lot adding to it. And then of course the design and how long the design takes. So, but I'm always open to having a conversation with people, and I think sort of people shouldn't ever feel embarrassed if they're not sure how much something's going to cost, or if actually they've got an idea and then it's like, oh, okay, my budget's quite a lot smaller, because like people just don't know. And
no, I wouldn't have had the faintest idea.
No. And when it comes to resizing rings, then some will be very simple. They'll be sort of 50 quid maybe, possibly even less. And then some will be quite complicated. They'll need things doing to the settings. There might be a couple of hundred. Right. So it sort of, it depends really. I mean, something that I always do, and it's something to sort of bear in mind, is a lot of the tiny diamonds that you kind of get often on eternity rings and set into wedding rings and things like that, or sort of around the like say as a halo around just an engagement ring. Then with those kind of gemstones, just the way they set, if they're not sort of regularly looked at and maintained, then they're the first to be lost. So I do get calls where like, I've lost a stone, and people will get quite upset and don't know where to turn, and it's like, it's okay, it can be fixed. And sort of some jewelers will then sort of look at that stone, they'll replace that stone, make sure that setting's safe. Personally, I don't do that. If I'm repairing one stone, I look at all of the little ones. I mean, obviously I'll make sure the big one isn't sort of crazy, but that's one thing I have to put in my disclaimer, that I can't sort of be liable. I mean, I've never had the big stone suddenly come out, but it's something that I have to do. As for the little ones, I will guarantee them for a year, and make sure that sort of you haven't then got other stones coming out. And it's the same sort of with resizers. Then I'll make sure that sort of if there's any what we call retipping, which is basically just laser welding extra metal onto the claws, I'll make sure that that's all done at the same time, so that it's properly serviced and it's not suddenly gonna do something.
Never thought about getting a ring serviced. But I love that. I like that as an idea. So just, this is obviously something that you've done before, and I kind of wondered if you have any stories. I know you mentioned the lady before who'd had her jewellery redesigned, but is this something that you see a lot, people who've gone through divorce and going through this process?
Yeah, I mean, it's only been sort of probably the last 3 years that I've sort of been focusing more on kind of the remodeling and that kind of thing. But yeah, I do see more of it. And I think the story is one really key, because ultimately when people have been through divorce, it's a tough time. So for example, there's one lady I was talking to, and I think she's got some rings from a previous marriage and then some from like not marriage but narcissistic relationship essentially. And she's like, I just don't want to think about it. So I said to her, do you know what, if you want, I mean, it's only sending the rings to Fellowes auction house, but if you're not familiar with the system, then it can be tricky. And actually she just doesn't want to answer the emails and have to deal with that. So I'm like, do you know what, just give it to me, like I'll sort it for you. Yeah. Which, you know, that's something that for her it's just the right thing. She doesn't want any redesign, she just wants it out. And sort of some people kind of feel a bit kind of like sort of almost like there's an energy associated with sort of the rings and that kind of thing, and actually they just don't want to have to think about it. So yeah, that's one thing. I mean, yeah, I've resized for people, and actually sometimes like, oh, it's a nice ring, I'm going to carry on wearing that, I'm not giving it back to him when you get sort of, yeah. So yeah, and then I've got others that I'm working on at the moment that obviously the stories are incomplete, so it's not something that I can share just yet.
Of course, I think it's really interesting. I mean, when you first approached me, I was like, well, I don't really like, mine are in a box. I don't know what, you know, it's not something that I've ever spoken to about clients, but I think that it's something that people do start sort of thinking about once they've come out the other side. And it's like,
and I think typically it's kind of, people tend to leave it a couple of years initially, which is why I guess you wouldn't really end up discussing that part. And ultimately when you're sort of evaluating assets and that kind of thing, sort of jewelry that's sort of small and on the, like, it's easy to kind of, that kind of thing. I mean, I don't know how the financial things and all that work, but often that doesn't really feature. So it would, be quite normal. And I think often, I mean, sometimes people do want to just sort of do something with their rings quite soon, but sometimes actually just letting sort of the dust settle a little bit and discovering sort of who they are now, what their new life looks like for a little while before doing anything is absolutely the right thing to do. Like I wouldn't ever want to sort of rush someone into it.
No, absolutely. But I think it's really useful for people to know that there are options out there, that there are things that you can do with them other than just leave them in a box like I have. So I think that's fascinating. Ruth, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that our listeners have got some real insight from what you've said today, and that helps them to perhaps make some slightly different decisions than they might otherwise have done. So before we leave you, could you possibly just tell our listeners, viewers, where they can get hold of you, where they can find you?
Yes, so my website is ruthmary.com, and then on social media, if you search Ruth Mary Jewellery, then you can find me. All of my contact details and everything, I manage those personally, so you will actually get through to little me.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And we'll catch up again soon.
Thank you.